happy are those whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Happy are those to whom the Lord imputes no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. While I kept silence, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not hide my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let all who are faithful offer prayer to you. At a time of distress, the rush of mighty waters shall not reach them. You are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with glad cries of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Do not be like a horse or a mule without understanding, whose temper must be curbed with a bit and bridle, else it will not stay near you. Many are the torments of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds those who trust in the Lord. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, O righteous, and shout for joy, all you upright in heart.
Thanks, babe. Our second reading this morning is from Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash one foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, Again it is written, Do not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, All these I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Jesus said to him, Away with you, Satan, for it is written, Worship the Lord your God and serve only God. Then the devil left him, and suddenly the angels came and waited on him. The word of God for the people of God. I am Dena Smith. I am one of the members of the worship team here at PIUCC. For those of you who don't know me or are still getting to know the folks in our congregation, we, by and large, are a passionate people. We are passionate about different things, sure, but you can certainly find the corners that really make each of us tick. Some passions are kind of baked in the cake, so to speak. My parents instilled in me a passion for music and for baseball. And since it's been a few weeks since I've seen y'all football, I don't know if you knew that about me. But in any case, we live in a time where we are encouraged, or I would go so far as to say expected, to express our passions through engagement. Engagement is how we show care and love. Accepting an invitation to respond to questions or disagreements is how we show faithfulness to these passions. Now, when it comes to disagreeing about our passions, I know we here in this room are in an incredibly unique position because in having met me, you have met somebody with whom you never disagree. At least that's what I tell myself every morning. But for the rest of the world, and for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting me, you must learn how to understand and how to grapple what not seeing eye to eye with somebody might mean. But, in all seriousness, we are told that if we care, we speak up. If we are righteous, we respond. If I am strong, I stay in the conversation. Stepping away from a discussion is avoidance, it's defensiveness, it's an unwillingness to talk. And beneath that pressure is a very quiet fear. If I don't speak, if I don't act, then who will? And this fear fuels our reaction. Now, stepping back, today, reactionary often sounds political. Reactionaries are the ones that push against progressivism. But if stripped of its punditry overtones, it really is just an identity formed by reaction. It's not visionary, nor is it rooted. It's a response. Resistance is reactionary. Reaction is human. Reactionary identity is when there's an urgency that defines us. And so if reactionary identity is formed when urgency defines us, this wilderness story of Matthew begins to sound less like a morality tale of good versus evil and more a story about pressure. Jesus does not start this exchange from a place of strength, quite the opposite. He is described as famished. He is 40 days in, which in Matthew and Old Testament speak is what felt hopelessly long. His body is vulnerable. And it's right there in that vulnerability that these invitations come. Turn stones to bread. Leap from the temple. Secure your place of authority. Each temptation says the same thing. Solve this now. Prove it now. Stabilize this now. Each invites Jesus to let urgency define him. An urgency to bridge that vulnerability that he's bringing. Because vulnerability has a way of drawing in pressure, doesn't it? And what's interesting about the pressure that comes from addressing vulnerability is it's not always based in cruelty. Sometimes it's just based in an expectation that in any desire you have to protect yourself, kindness dictates there must be some sort of an extension. Exposing a vulnerability is seen as the same as offering your vulnerability for others to press against. Being hungry in the desert invites both the question, why don't you just eat? And don't you want others to not be hungry? In modern days, this can look a lot different than something quite this allegorical. It can be more straightforward. Interestingly for me, what parallel this draws modern day is from a video commentary I watched about a year ago from video essayist Lindsay Ellis discussing indie pop musician Tori Amos. Maybe you've heard of her. She was almost popular in the 90s. She was a piano-playing pop musician who kind of paved the way for Alicia Keys and Vanessa Carlton. She never quite hit the mainstream, it's argued, because her most impactful songs were her most vulnerable. And vulnerability offered outwardly is rarely just accepted with a quiet empathy. At worst, it's met with scrutiny, the assumption that it must be doing something or asking for something. But even the most charitable interpretation is that the vulnerability is put out there ready to carry something. The latter interpretation doesn't come from critics, it comes from those who are also hurting. In 1992, when Tori Amos was touring her album Little Earthquakes, she would perform her song a cappella called Me and a Gun, which was a first-person account of how she had endured an assault, what thoughts, no matter how banal, passed through her mind so that she could survive that moment. After shows, girls and women would approach her, seeing their own trauma mirrored in her own. They would give her their stories. They would ask her for help. Her openness became a place where others sought refuge. It was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Because this vulnerability did not just invite connection, it invited responsibility. She was still working on surviving. Some would come up to her and say, "I haven't escaped yet. Bring me with you. You can help me." Her tour manager had to point out to her they were a band, they weren't vigilantes. They couldn't just purchase more tour buses to try to rescue everyone. In moments like that, the temptation is subtle but powerful. Solve it now. Carry it now. Stabilize the situation immediately. React. And this is precisely the kind of invitation that Jesus faces in the wilderness. Not an invitation to do something evil or wrong, but an invitation to do something now. Solve hunger. Prove safety. Stabilize uncertainty. Bridge the vulnerability not with words, but with action. At first glance, that sounds compassionate. That sounds helpful. It sounds even righteous. But compassion is not always measured by speed, and urgency has a way of narrowing how we care. We deceive ourselves into thinking that an immediate response must be, at least in part, the best response, the best path to fulfill our needs. In the wilderness, hunger is real, and safety matters. Stability is not trivial. Jesus isn't pretending these things don't matter. He is starving, he is exposed, he is alone. Yet the invitations he faces are not really about whether hunger should be addressed. Turn stones to bread. Leap so that protection will appear. Secure the kingdoms now so that uncertainty disappears. Each proposal responds to something very real. But each responds by collapsing the future into the present. Solve it now, prove it now, stabilize it now. The pressure is not to ignore need. The pressure is to meet need in a way that trades trust for immediacy, to accept the kind of solution that urgency prefers. This is where discernment becomes difficult. The offer doesn't present itself as faithless, just as necessary. You see, in this telling, the tempter did not begin with threats. He just began with proposals, questions, possibilities, suggestions. Nothing that looks overtly hostile. But the shape of the exchange is unmistakable. It invites Jesus to define himself in response. He is the one who, simply for being hungry, has to justify why he won't eat. He has to prove, he has to stay in the conversation. And this pressure to stay inside the exchange, to respond and clarify and prove is not remotely unique to that moment. Even our most thoughtful discourse carries it. This past week draws to our attention, for example, Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, delivered at the very end of the Civil War. He spoke with extraordinary humility, acknowledging that both sides read the same Bible and prayed to the same God. And yet, even within the restraint, he framed the conflict. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let the nation perish, and the war came. See, it's eloquent, it's measured, and it's almost symmetrical, but still it names roles. It identifies those who pushed for the war and those who had no noble choice but to accept it. And for someone on the other side, no doubt, would have described those roles differently. Even our most careful language cannot escape perspective. Even humility still frames. And in our own time, we see this dynamic play out in two very familiar ways. Sometimes through the quick rebuttal, the decisive, confident answer that reduces a complicated reality to something obvious. And then also sometimes through the gentle framing of, I'm just asking questions. Both create a narrowing, presenting the issue as though the answer should already be clear. Both leave very little room for nuance because they are built on the assumption that truth is already settled. And when the response is clever and glib and lands clearly and it's satisfying, it carries extra weight. We don't hear it just as persuasive, but as especially true. Either you see it or you don't. And if you don't see it, it's up to you to explain why. Either you respond or you concede. In both cases, the invitation is the same. Stay within this frame, play by these rules, except that the faithful thing to do is respond. Either you agree with the obvious, or you just don't want to solve the problem. If you don't want to solve the problem, then what are we doing here? Do you even care? Which is why the tension eventually becomes personal. In our own time, one of the most common ways this pressure surfaces is in the now familiar declaration, "Unfriend me if you believe this." What's striking is that rarely comes at the end of a conversation. It's usually delivered unprompted, the beginning of a conversation that will take no questions, only likes. And this is where it becomes complicated, because it isn't only a boundary. If someone truly just needed distance, couldn't they quietly step away? Couldn't they unfollow you, unfriend, heaven forbid, log off? But naming it publicly does something more. It becomes an unsolicited declaration, a way of shaping the conversation before it begins, of saying, here's a line, if you cross it, you lose me. But sometimes that declaration comes from exhaustion and from self-protection, a knowledge that we're not prepared to engage. But sometimes also, if we're honest, it is a power move. Not an invitation to dialogue by definition, but a way of defining the terms in advance. It reflects the strange reality of our moment that we have constant access to one another's midday thoughts in a way we never have before. The person who shares photos of their dog might also have convictions that feel impossible to carry. The friend you made because of a deep shared passion for social justice may also be an ardent Yankees fan. The neighbor who once encouraged you to attend the church that you now help lead proudly wears a DHS badge, and you find yourself wondering if he hears the church's official stance of the UCC, and if he wonders if he's welcome anymore. The overlap of our lives is no longer optional. And when that overlap becomes uncomfortable, the instinct is often to manage the exchange before it even begins, which isn't that far from the wilderness after all. Because in this telling, you'll notice, Jesus doesn't win the argument. The tempter isn't persuaded. Jesus doesn't stay until the conversation resolves. He ends it. Away with you. This is not a mic drop, but it also isn't an unfriend me. It was more like an unfollow, mute for 30 days. He wasn't saying that the needs weren't real. He certainly hadn't stopped caring about hunger or safety or stability. He didn't stop wishing that things could be different. He was just done arguing. And in that moment, stepping away was not surrender, it was resistance. He had responded, he had pushed back, he had played defense. And he had reached that point where continuing the exchange was no longer faithfulness, it was simply exhaustion. So he moved on. And only then, Matthew's telling informs us, did the angels come and tend to him, not because the problem was solved. The tempter remains somewhere probably thinking he's right, but because there was never going to be effective care in the middle of that exchange. There was only ever going to be friction. Stepping away didn't change the tempter, it didn't erase hunger, it didn't provide stability, but it did make a space for relief. It allowed Jesus to stop reacting long enough to be tended. And from there, he could keep going. This is not just a wilderness story or a cautionary tale against the perpetually online. See, earlier I talked a little bit about Tori Amos, the songwriter who found herself facing the pain of others pressing up against her own. When she made her vulnerability visible, it drew expectation. People were saying if she understood, then she would help. If she survived, then she could save. If she cared, she would act. And it was heartbreaking for her to not pull each fan that came to her to safety. Her tour manager told her plainly, "You can't just rescue them all," and she responded, "Okay, so where do we begin?" She figured she could start by making sure she could direct them to the resources that they could use when they came to her. And then she learned that there was no nationwide resource. And with that knowledge, she helped co-found what is now the largest national network for survivors, an organization now known as RAIN. She personally answered the first hotline call. I'm not here to pretend like stepping back like that is emotionally tidy. It doesn't erase the need or quiet the tension. But also Psalm 32 reminds us that this kind of stepping back is not simply silence. It is not denial. It is not pretending the tension isn't real. The psalmist begins by describing the cost of holding everything in. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Silence here is not peace. It is strain. It is the exhausting effort of carrying something that cannot be carried indefinitely. But when truth is spoken, when the reality of need and limitation and pain is acknowledged, something shifts. Relief doesn't come because everything is resolved, but rather because the burden is no longer being managed alone. I said, I will confess, the psalmist writes, and the pressure lifts. Not because the world changes, but because the interior struggle loses its grip. And from that release comes guidance, a freedom to move without compulsion. I will instruct you and teach you on the way you should go. The psalm ends not with resolution, but the possibility and the trust of movement. And none of this means that engagement itself is unfaithful. Jesus does not leave at the first question. He responds, he answers, he bears witness. He responds, he answers, he bears witness. Because sometimes engagement is not about changing the other person's mind. It's about remaining rooted long enough to name what matters, even if the other person is naming something as well. The tempter is not disingenuous, bad faith arguments aside. Hunger is real, safety matters, stability is not trivial. Engagement is not always between the truth and the lies. Sometimes it is between different ways of responding to the same urgency. But engagement is not meant to be universal, and it is certainly not meant to last forever. Even Jesus reaches a point where the exchange has done what it can, and he moves on. And that movement matters, because the urgency that keeps us locked inside these exchanges is often rooted in something deeper than disagreement. It is rooted in the quiet assumption that if we do not respond, no one will. That if we step away, care will disappear. That if we stop holding the line will in turn collapse. But the church exists precisely so that love does not depend on any one person's constant reaction. We are not asked to be everyone all at once. We're not asked to solve everything now. We are not asked to carry what was never ours to carry alone. Boundaries do not end care. They make shared care possible. And this is where the wilderness story becomes less about personal endurance and more about communal life. Jesus steps away not because the need vanishes, but because the mission continues. Angels tend him in the wilderness, a moment of being cared for that is not separate from the larger story. Much later, after the cross and the empty tomb, he will stand on a mountain and proclaim that all authority in heaven and earth has been given, and promise, I am with you always until the end of the age. And so we here gather not as saviors, but as servants. Servants who trust that care can be shared and that responsibility can be held together. That sometimes faithfulness means staying and sometimes it means stepping back. Not because stepping back is better, but because no single moment, no single person is meant to carry it all. Love does not seek to grow through constant reaction. It endures through shared tending, through knowing when to engage and when to release, through trusting that the work continues even when we are not the ones holding it at that moment. This week, I call on you to look for the resistors, those who are staying and those who are stepping back, those who are refusing to let urgency decide what love requires. And when you can, be an angel among them, not settling every question, but tending one another so the work of love can continue, even when we see it differently. Because what binds us is not a uniformity in response, but this faithfulness in care.